So let me tell you about principal parts. So as it turns out, there are some irregular forms. I mentioned an irregular form for come and go at the beginning of this video. So there are some irregular kinds of forms. But what grammarians have realized is that Greek verbs at the very most, now some of them don't have this many, but at the very most, Greek verbs only can have 6 different forms. Now that sounds crazy. 6? What are you, crazy? But it's possible. Greek can have up to 6 different stems. And so we call these 6 possible stems the principal parts of a Greek verb. And so on this slide, I want to tell you about the first 3 principal parts. And there's a song to help you remember the principal parts of luo. So luo is the basic paradigm verb for New Testament Greek usually. This is the present stem. If you take the ending off, you have the stem. So it's like you have a stem, and then the ending is like the flower on the top of the stem. Or I like to talk about train cars. This is the main train car, and this is the caboose, the ending. But the lu part is the present stem. What that means is if I see lu, then I know that that form probably has continuous action. It's a present stem. And then the future stem adds a sigma, which is actually fairly easy to remember. Of things to remember in Greek, that one's pretty easy. The future adds a sigma. And then there's the same ending. See the same ending? So the second stem tells you the future stem. It can be irregular. I mean, these can be completely different, and you just have to memorize the future stem because it's different. You remember urkamai? Urkamai was the verb that on the first slide when I was telling you about how the interlinear is laid out. Urkamai was the word for the present stem. This is the form you find in the dictionary. And the aorist was something weird. Aelthen comes out of nowhere. Urkamai is thoroughly weird. The future of urkamai is alusamai. Where does the lambda come from? I mean, really, who came up with this word? Really, really old words in languages tend to be weird like that because sometimes they've come from a long time ago. Several tribes came together, 3 different dialects, and they all merged into one. And went was the past tense that won. And go was the present tense that won out of that merging together of dialects of languages. Maybe. And so these are the first 3 principal parts. This is aorist. The third principal part tells you the aorist stem. It also has a sigma, but it's usually a sigma alpha that is added. It also puts a letter on the front. This is called an augment. So you don't necessarily have to know this. But if you have a photographic memory, why not learn it? So you see lu is played out in all of these. The future adds a sigma, the aorist adds a sigma alpha and puts an epsilon on the front. Not always, but that's a little bit of the form. And so it's worthwhile, I think, to memorize the most normative, the default forms. There are irregulars all over there. There are all kinds of exceptions, which is why people go crazy. But if you memorize the main principal parts, then you will have memorized the main stem changes. We call this a tense suffix. It is a letter that indicates the tense that is added to the basic stem. And then the ending comes after it. So if you think of a train metaphor, this is the main part of the train. This is a second car that's been added, and then this is the caboose that has the ending. On this one, we have a little front car that's in front of the main car, and then you have the sigma alpha that is a car that's added, and then sometimes you have even more endings on the caboose. The first person singular, I loosed, is what this means. Doesn't have anything on the end. So the song to remember these principal parts is luo luso elusada. I'll tell you the rest later. Luo luso elusala luka lelumai eluthain Luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane. So the first three principal parts. And again, what do they tell you? They tell you the stem on which all present forms are built, the stem on which all future tenses forms are built, and the stem on which all aorist forms are built. Now, I'm lying a little bit. You'll see here future, active, and middle. That's true here, too. Only the aorist, active, and middle is built on this. More on that to come. Okay. So the present stem adds nothing to the stem. The future tense adds a sigma to the stem. The aorist adds a sigma alpha and an augment, is what this is called, which is an epsilon if the word begins with a consonant. Okay. Imperfect, what does that say? I can't see because imperfect built here. Okay. I am sorry. I am disoriented. Now I'm back, I think. Am I back? I'm recording. Okay. I'm going to have to trim that. Okay, I'm back. The imperfect tense is built on the present stem. Again, this is weird, but you see the present tense means continuous action, and the imperfect tense means continuous action. So if you think of tense as being about kind of action, then it makes sense that the imperfect tense would be built off of the present stem. So this augment is what indicates past time. So with the aorist, that augment says this is an aorist in past time. And so if you take the present stem and you put an augment on the front like an epsilon, then you've put continuous action into past time. Now the imperfect takes a different set of endings, and I have videos on the verb endings. But again, this is for those of you who want to move toward being able to recognize the forms a little bit. This video is primarily about the meaning of the tenses. So there's a lot in this video that you can kind of move past quickly if you don't want to know the forms and some of the more advanced intermediate nuances. Okay, the imperfect tense is past continuous, and so it's going to have an I verb, and the I indicates it's imperfect. Indicative, active, third, singular. So was being silent, or the passive would be was. Yeah, actually, that particular verb probably doesn't go into the passive. But if you say I was loosing, that would be imperfect active. I was being loosed would be imperfect passive. Okay, so you see, past continuous action is what the imperfect tense means. There are several nuances of the imperfect tense. This is what we normally do in third semester Greek. They're the nuances. Okay. No, here I'm giving you the basic translations. So the imperfect active is was sleeping, or they were eating. And then the passive is going to be she was being used, or they were being tried. So you can see that this is past continuous action. And the imperfect tense pretty much is about time. So the imperfect tense is not used as widely as the other tenses. If a biblical author uses the imperfect tense, pay attention to that, because the aorist is the default, and the aorist doesn't connote any kind of action. So if the imperfect tense is used, it is making a special connotation for the kind of action involved. Okay, and it means past time for sure in the imperfect tense. He was sleeping. They were eating. She was being used. They were being tried. Hear the continuousness of it. Okay, here's the intermediate functions of the imperfect tense. The imperfect past continuous, that's the simple one, Iterative, used to. So I find this a lot. The imperfect, you can add the words used to do something, used to whatever it is, and it'll make sense. These are words that you're not putting meaning there that isn't there. It's like, trust the force, Luke. I feel. It's like on Princess Bride, where he's discerning where the entrance to the laboratory is. Oh, it's the tree. So you can feel these nuances. So you're translating an imperfect and putting the words used to in front of the imperfect. Wow, that's what it's saying. And you kind of have that ding. That's exactly the nuance here. It fits what I'm feeling from the context. So that's an iterative imperfect, something that was repeated. I used to go to the store every Tuesday. That would be an imperfect tense. Inceptive, I began to. Now, there was an ingressive aorist that was, I began to sojourn in 1960. That's aorist. But if it's something that you began to do continuously, I began to go to IWU for 3 years. That's imperfect, began to. That's called an inceptive imperfect. There's also, we called it a voluntative present tense, I think. I can't remember, but try to. If you add the words try to, that's a tendential imperfect. And again, I was trying to. Maybe that's the translation. But it's something that happened continuously in the past. And then there's the wishful. Would that my words were written in a book. Would that my words were being written. That could be an imperfect tense as well. So these are some of the nuances that an imperfect translation can have, and you have to kind of feel it, and it'll pop. Okay, now let me go on with the perfect tense. We're reaching the end of this video. So the perfect tense implies that something was done and remained done. And I've mentioned the 3 different perfect tenses. There's the present perfect, which is I have been married 20 years. There's the past perfect. I had been married 5 years when I went on a cruise. And then there's the future perfect. I will have been married 30 years when I buy that yacht, which of course is probably not going to happen. But anyway, you can see how the perfect tense works. It's completed action with the results continuing. It's not continuous. It's not, I've been getting married for 20 years. I got married first year and the second year. It's not ongoing activity. It's completed. I have been married. I got married. It was completed, and I stayed married. So like in 1 John 1:10, if we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar. So what's the connotation there of the perfect tense? Have sinned, that I've sinned at some point in the past, and that the results of that sin have continued to where I need cleansing. By the way, this is what I think 1 John 1:8 means when it says, if we say that we do not have sin. It doesn't say if we say that we don't practice sin continuously. That's not what it says. It says if we say that we do not have sin now. And so verse 10 simply fleshes that out. If we say that we haven't sinned in the past, with the result that we have sin that needs to be cleansed, we make him a liar. Now, by the way, if Christ has cleansed your sin, that's not true. John is talking about the person who denies a need for Christ at all. These are docetists. I don't need the blood of Christ. Jesus didn't have blood. Jesus only seemed to be human. That's what the docetists believe. And so they didn't think they had sin that needed to be cleansed. He wasn't talking about the person who's been a Christian and has had their sins cleansed by the blood of Christ. But if a person were to say, I don't have sin, I have not sinned, virtually equivalent statements, that's the person he's saying is deceiving themselves and making God into a liar. But you see how the perfect tense works in that case. In the code, the perfect tense, again, has an R because they couldn't use P because P was used for present, right? That's why you couldn't use I for imperative because I was used for indicative. So they used an M for imperative in the mood. So have sinned. I've taken this from 1 John 1:10. Again, you wouldn't know that this is hamartano unless you'd studied Greek, but you can click on the number and it'll take you to hamartano, which means to sin. The rough translation at the end. So have sinned with the result that I have sinned. It doesn't mean I have continued sinning. It means I sinned in the past and I have sinned in the present as a result. Translations of the perfect. So in the active, your faith has saved you and it still saved you. We have sinned and the sin remains with us. So you see how this is different. So you can use has and have to translate an aorist, but it has a different connotation because in the perfect, it means has saved you and you remain saved. Have sinned and you still have sinned. The aorist, if you say he saved you, you're just saying it happened, blah. Or you have sinned, blah, in the past. All have sinned. So all have sinned and are lacking the glory of God. All have sinned is an aorist. It's just saying at some point you've sinned. That's different from 1 John 1:10, which uses the perfect tense. We have sinned and we have sinned as a result. The passive, it has been written, the words have been spoken. By the way, all the places in the New Testament where it says, as it is written, it generally is a perfect tense. It has been written, which is neat. It suggests that the writing of Scripture is complete. It's completed. It has been written, it was written, and now it's still written. It stands written. And so even though it's normally translated just as it is written, it is a perfect tense, meaning that it stands written. Having been written and completed in the past, it stands written still today, which is neat. Again, you don't want to overplay these things, but that is the connotation. Nuances of the perfect, intermediate kind of nuances. So the emphasis can be on the completed part. We call that an aoristic perfect, where it's so emphasizing the completedness that it's almost an aorist, but not quite, because it's emphasizing the completedness. It is finished. Well, actually, that's yeah, okay, never mind. That's more intensive emphasis on the continuing impact. That's the intensive perfect. It is finished. It remains. It stands finished. Okay. And then you could have a dramatic perfect, again, where you're talking about something now, but you use the perfect tense to dramatize it. Okay. So basically, if the perfect is a point that continues, a point in a line. So the continuous, like the present and imperfect tenses, a line might symbolize its action. The aorist, a point, might symbolize its action. Perfective action of the perfect might be symbolized by a point with a line that continues. And that's the perfect tense. And with that, I think we come to the end of this video, although it may not. No, okay, it doesn't come to the end of this video. The last three principal parts. So remember, the first three principal parts were luo, luso, elusa. That's the present stem, the future stem, and the aorist stem. Now the last three principal parts. It's like if you took all the General Motors car and you divide the chassis into six different, all of General Motors cars fit on 6 different chassis. And if you know these 6 chassis, you can recognize any General Motors car. So for any particular Greek verb, you can recognize any form of a Greek verb if you know its 6 principal parts. Okay, we've had the first 3: luo, luso, elusa, leluka, lelumai, eluthane. So these are the last 3 here: luo, luso, elusa, leluka, lelumai, eluthane. So these 2 here are the perfect stems, and you can see what they do. This is the perfect active stem. This is the perfect middle or passive stem, and then in a second I'll tell you about the aorist passive stem. So for the perfect active, it adds a kappa alpha, and then it reduplicates on the front. Basically, the first letter gets a little beside itself, and you put an epsilon in the middle. That's called reduplication. I don't know why they don't call it duplication, by the way, because it's just duplication. But we call it reduplication. Same thing here. So the perfect stem, you can see the perfect stem is this lelu, lelu. All of the perfects have the reduplication with an epsilon. For the perfect middle or passive, the ending is shoved right on the stem. So that usually you would have an oh my connecting vowel there, like cartilage. This is arthritic. You have the ending grinding on the stem. It hurts so bad. But anyway, maybe that'll help you remember. So in the perfect middle or passive, the ending is shoved right onto the stem. Perfect active, you take that perfect stem and you put a kappa alpha on the end of it. Okay, so there you have it. So this would be translated reduplicates, and the aorist augments in the past. When it's in the indicative, it augments. Okay, so theta eta is the indication of the aorist passive. So I don't know if you remember with the other slide I had on principal parts, it was the aorist active and middle I mentioned. it wasn't on the slide, but I mentioned that it was only the aorist active. So the sigma alpha form is only aorist active and middle. The theta eta here is aorist passive. So if you want to say he was loosed, you use the theta eta and then you put an ending on it. So again, the train card, what are the train cards? Well, here you have le on the front, lu, which is the heart of the train, and then the caboose is shoved right on. It's fused into the main part on this one. With this one, you have the add-on on the front with the reduplication. You have the main part of the train, and you have a kappa alpha, which is the tense suffix, and then you can have a caboose with endings after this as well in other forms. This is the add-on on the front with the reduplication, the main car, and it's fused. And then with this one, you have a little augment added on the front. You have the main part. You have a car that is the tense suffix theta eta telling you it's aorist passive, and then you have the ending caboose at the end. So those are the forms. So adds a kappa alpha, shoves the ending right on the stem, and then adds a theta eta for these forms. Now this particular, so the past perfect is built on this as well. I'm not going to tell you about the past perfect. It's not very common, although I've seen some this last month in the book of Acts. Basically, past perfect adds a epsilon iota connecting vowels. Now, let me finally say that the future passive is built on this as well. The future passive takes this stem and puts a sigma on it. As you expect the future to have a sigma, the future passive takes this stem and adds a sigma on the end. These are things you don't necessarily have to know. But if you want to move toward learning the forms eventually, those are some things that you would want to eventually learn. Okay, now have we reached the end of our journey? We have. Okay, so that is my video on the Greek tenses. There's an awful lot in here, and I've talked very quickly, but this is the kind of video you may want to watch more than once. In fact, you may want to divide it up into chunks. So you might want to watch, through the aorist first, and skip the principal part slides, and then maybe go back and learn the perfect tense and skip the principal part slides. Maybe skip the nuance slides at first, and then go back. So what are the parts of this video? You have the tenses themselves and their basic meanings. You have some stuff on nuances, and you have these 2 slides on forms. You might attack this video in 3 parts. The first part to learn are the tenses, what the tenses mean basically. And even that you can divide up into, say, aorist, present through aorist, and then the perfect forms. Then you could learn the nuances, and then you could look at the form pages. And of course, this is the beginning of a journey. This is just the beginning. There's much more time in your life, I hope, to learn other things. So, overview of the Greek tenses.